So, Slate has an article about evictions. Now, every single article that you're going to read in the media, almost every single article. I've yet to read one that's actually an article that has to do with landlords and evictions that's pro landlord or pro property rights. I guess this stuff drives me up the wall. Maybe I'm just some lunatic, super pro property rights, libertarian that like doesn't get it or whatever. But I feel like such an alien in this world. Basically, I believe that, let's say, in the simple concept of, if you worked your whole life, and you didn't spend this money, you saved it. Let's say you worked your whole life and you saved $1 million, and somebody just came by with a gun and just robbed the $1 million that you saved your whole life. That means they robbed. They didn't just take just the money. They actually took all the time that your whole life, all the time that you worked on, you spent creating that capital or saving that capital. They took it from you. So this is what I don't get. A lot of the left, they're pro-labor. But you can be a blue-collar person that's laboring, and just by the fact that you just don't spend your money and you invest it into an apartment building, all of a sudden they're not pro-labor. All of a sudden you're this like greedy, parasitic landlord. But that's, to me, it's the same thing. If the state or the government forces you to have a tenant that is not paying you for that property, or because of whatever whatever excuse they come up with, oh, there's little affordable inventory, or people are getting price gouged or whatever, we need rent control, or there's a crazy pandemic that almost only the average age of death is like 80 years old, but there's a crazy pandemic, so nobody can leave their house, therefore people have to live for free. I mean, they're speaking out both sides of their mouth, obviously, because during the pandemic they didn't shut down taxes, they didn't shut down sales taxes. If they expect landlords not to get paid during the pandemic and you can't evict people, then with that logic goes into work. You couldn't quit your job. You keep going to work then. If you want to quit your job, too bad. Taxes? No, that's too sad. There's a pandemic and people have a hard time, whatever excuse they may be. But no, they didn't. Obviously, they did not do that. They only try to penalize landlords because they're a minority, and they are a minority voting bloc. There's less landlords than there are tenants. So let's check out this super insanely biased lefty article about evictions. The evictions that that landlords got away with during the pandemic. And this title presumes that there is something to get away with. Like, somebody, like, you giving somebody housing, basically it's you are forfeiting personal consumption and putting it into a business, investing into housing for other people. And you had a contractual agreement with somebody that you forfeit consumption, but somebody's going to pay you for that. That's always the agreement. And if they don't, if for whatever reason they're not fulfilling their obligation, or you just want that person out, that you should be able to evict them, because at the end of the day, this building is your labor. You spent your whole life, or you spent a lot of your working hours acquiring this building. So just the notion that the government can just snap its fingers and all of a sudden people can live for free in your house, or it's the same thing as like using your labor for free. It's like indentured servitude, to me. Indentured servitude. But apparently people that didn't pay their rent and just moved out by themselves, well, the landlord just got away with a freebie. What is the difference between just because we have a pandemic or some people got fired or whatever, some kind of hardship? Does that kind of person just go into a grocery store and just pick whatever they want and walk out without paying for it? No, they can't. That's ridiculous. So why can people live in your house without paying for it? I don't get their logic at all. As businesses shuttered, millions of U.S. residents lost their jobs in the first few months of COVID-19 pandemic. Many feared that unprecedented surge of evictions was around the corner. But after the Supreme Court struck down the Centers for Disease Control nationwide eviction moratorium last August, ending one of the main protections to keep people housed during the pandemic, court evictions filings didn't immediately surge above the pandemic levels. Had the predicted eviction tsunami simply evaporated? Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of fear mongering. They're like, there's going to be eviction tsunami. Well, one did materialize. A bunch of states evicted, ended the moratorium, and yeah, everything's okay. Those who fight evictions daily, housing advocates, tenant organizers, legal aid providers, instead of like, this is just so frustrating. Instead of fighting evictions, put your money where your mouth is and actually provide housing. If you want, provide free housing for people or provide low income housing. Why are you trying to get in between other people's personal agreements? There's more to the story. Many suspect that eviction tsunami is surging around us, but has been rendered invisible because of much as the displacement is occurring outside the legal system through so-called informal eviction. Well, at the end of the day, no landlord wants to evict anybody. Just like, unlike popular leftist belief, there isn't like these. I mean, I'm sure there's like some tiny fraction amount of bosses, but nobody wants to fire workers. And same landlords don't just want to like evict people. It's awkward. It's a very unpleasant human interaction, and people just like mutually beneficial interactions. But evictions or telling somebody to leave, as nasty as it is, sometimes it might be called for, but when a person's not paying their rent. So it's not like most of the people that were even evicted or left their property or left, like their rental unit, it's not because they're a great tenant and paying their rent. They fell behind on rent, and even though they didn't why should landlord, if the tenant gets free representation or whatever, why should the tenant spend the tenant already reneged on their contract. They already didn't pay didn't hold up their end of the bargain and didn't pay rent. And I'm sure they got to live in that apartment for months for free, right? And on top of that, why should the landlord have to spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on the eviction attorney? Add insult to injury. Informal eviction can take many forms, including tactics like landlord intimidation, refusal to make repairs, so you have somebody that's not paying in your unit, and you have to make repairs. I mean, how messed up is that? So yeah, you're not getting paid. You have to pay taxes. You have to pay the mortgage. And now you have to make repairs on the unit that you're not getting paid for. That's somebody stealing basically your property. Or spreading misinformation, particularly related to tenants' rights. but because they don't follow a well-defined process, by definition occur in the shadows, informal evictions are challenging to measure. And without an accurate measurement of informal eviction, we're 2 years into pandemic, one that has underscored the inextricable link between housing and health, with best at murky understanding of how housing displacement is impacting families in the U.S. What is this inextricable link between housing and health? Are you sure it's... They just make this statement where it's like, well, maybe some people who are not mentally responsible or mentally healthy, well, of course they don't have good housing because they don't hold down a job and they don't want to pay their rent. I mean, correlation doesn't mean causation. Maybe it's the other way around. People with bad health, meaning people who are too unwell to, responsibly pay their rent, well, they don't have good housing. Take the way that informal eviction is often carried out, it becomes clear why tracking this type of displacement is challenging. A tenant moves after receiving a request to move or a threat from the landlord, even though an official claim was never filed in court. Yeah, fuck that. Like, this landlord stuff is just like a relationship. It's like, if you don't want to date somebody, if you don't have to sleep with somebody, well, you shouldn't have to. Just like you shouldn't have to go to work for a company you don't want to work for, you want to quit. Why should you have to house somebody that you don't want to house? Especially if you sign a contract and they're not holding up their end of the contract. So yeah, if the tenant hasn't been paying their rent, I mean, at least it's upon them to cut the landlord's loss and actually vacate the unit, so the landlord can start recovering some of their money back. A request or the threat from a landlord can carry the authority of the law, but they can be just as effective as enforcing family to move. Decision to move is typically due to fear of engaging with a court system. A record of an eviction filing has a devastating impacts on the future housing access. Unequal access to information on the legal process. I mean, unequal. Everybody has... this writer is so clueless. Like, everybody has an unequal height. Everybody has an unequal weight. All market participants, no matter what market, have unequal information. Obviously, duh. And the reality that, in many states, the law favors landlords' property rights over tenants' rights to remain stably housed. Well, I guess depends what city, but yeah. Why should your right to remain stable housed trump other people's right to own stuff? So ridiculous. It's clear these tactics simply rely on imbalance of power. See, this is like... Here's the crux of leftism. It's imbalance of perceived power. Somebody's perceived to be a landlord, therefore greedy and rich. And somebody's a tenant. Even though they could be a lot more wealthy or whatever, it's just the mere fact of there being a tenant. Therefore, the left is always on their side. Information between landlords and tenants, as well as illusion that family has a real choice whether or not to move. But the reality is, when faced with the landlord's harassment, coercion, neglect, we're forced with the landlord's neglect. What about the neglect to pay rent? So neglect to pay rent, that's not like neglect at all. But if you're not paying rent, you have the right to get all sorts of free repairs. That's the same thing if I rent a car from Avis. I'm renting the car and then I stop paying for the rental. because of quote unquote pandemic. Well, during the pandemic, you need to get to work and this and that. So the government forces Avis to let me keep renting this car. On top of that, I get a flat tire. I need oil change. So I send it to Avis like, hey, you're neglecting your car that you rented to me. You need to update it. You need to keep fixing it. Like, what kind of bullshit is that? Especially for many low income and black and Hispanic. Okay, here we go. Just the left's no lefty article will be complete without mentioning that black and Hispanics are disproportionately affected, who face systemic barriers to housing, rooted on nature's racist. Here we go. Racist and undocumented immigrants who have justifiably fear of engaging with the legal system. We mean undocumented. So the landlord is nice enough to provide housing for somebody that's completely undocumented, and all they have to do, they don't ask for any kind of paperwork or whatever. Undocumented immigrants probably get paid cash under the table, and this person kind of like, you know what? I'm going to help you guys out. I'm gonna go ahead and give you guys a chance, even though you guys are high risk tenants or whatever. I'm gonna help you out, and they don't pay the rents, and now they can't get evicted. I mean, these guys are you're like, you're doing somebody a public good. You're a hero. You're housing. Apparently, you should be to the left. You're housing You're giving rent. You're giving rental units, housing undocumented migrants. But now, at the turn of a dime, you're the asshole here. Defining a form of eviction further complicated the fact that some tactics used by landlords blur the lines between informal and legal, depending on existing tenant protections. Landlord lockouts, utility shutoffs, and other methods of purposefully making a home uninhabitable and technically illegal in most states. But Nation Housing Law Protects survey conducted a few months into the pandemic found over 90% of legal aid and civil rights attorneys across the U.S. saw legal evictions in their area, from landlords locking out tenants and other falsely claiming the moratorium didn't apply, enforcement mechanisms, and penalties for landlords who violate tenants' protections different from state to state. Blah, 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 blah. Notably, American Housing Survey, fielded by the U.S. Census Bureau, adapted a set of questions from Mars in 2017, finding that informal evictions may be 5 times as common as formal. Well, I wouldn't even classify as quote-unquote eviction. I mean, I rented rooms to people, and people have been quote-unquote informally evicted. I mean, going to the legal battle of an actual courtroom, yes, that's the absolute, like the nuclear option. Most of the time, some people have some common decency not to drag them and themselves through the court system. And if somebody hasn't been paying their rent and has been a shitty tenant, a lot of those people, they know they're a shitty tenant. I've had that. There's people I've rented rooms to before. They haven't paid the rent. They had psychotic breakdowns. They didn't get along with their roommates and this and that. Well, when I confronted them and say, hey, I just want you out, and I'm going to forgive the rent you owe me, just leave the place. I guess that was an informal eviction, but you have some kind of modicum of decency to be like, you know what, I fucked up. And I'm just going to not escalate the situation any further. I'm just going to leave. Obviously. Should every time somebody moves out, or every time somebody's asked to leave, there should be a court ordered? I mean, I see it as no different than just from like a relationship. You can date whoever you want. You can sleep with whoever you want. Do you need to get a court order? An order from the court, or like file uh, a legal situation because you want to stop dating somebody, stop seeing somebody. Researchers caution against using these findings without further scrutiny, but even the inclusion of a set of questions that estimate informal eviction in the U.S. as important as the first step forward. The progress on measuring is promising, as the recent proposal from the Biden administration to field national survey on informal evictions. But as studies show, informal evictions is happening daily, and often with little or no recourse for the tenants. What recourse do you want if you don't paying rent? What about the recourse for the landlord for having to pay the mortgage, having to repaint the walls, having to make it ready again for the money lost? I'm sure Biden's not mentally there. He's like a little puppet that's being puppeteered, but I'm sure people in his administration would want a national rent control. Something national where where you could only be, like, the beauty of other, like, states other than California and New York is non-rent control states is you just don't have to renew somebody's lease. And usually good tenants don't even get a rent increase because people want to hold on to those. So if you're a good tenant and you pay your rent on time, it don't cause any problems for the landlord, they will forego raising your rent every year. But that's how it should be. If the landlord for whatever reason doesn't want to extend your lease or whatever, just like if you want to quit your job for any reason and don't want to work there anymore, you should be able to end that contract. Efforts to even the playing field. The playing field is already even. Focus on, except in California, I'm sure the blue states in New York, the playing field's way tilted in the tenants' rights. But these are the same idiots that have these super strict housing for quote-unquote neighborhood integrity and traffic and whatever. These same idiots cause an insane amount of housing shortage through their zoning policies. Therefore, landlords there make a shit ton of money. Just imagine San Francisco. A lot of those people, residents, like young techies that live in San Francisco, and they make like over 100K a year. But half their income goes to paying rent. And the people that actually own the real estate in the SF area probably collect most of the capital that actually tech companies make. Well, it doesn't have to be that way, obviously. These are the critical, but equally important is protection from the many factors that place tenants at the whim of landlords in the first place. At the whim? What do you mean at the whim? Leaving susceptible to the informal tactics that so often precipitate a move. What do you mean precipitate a move? Like, you mean like, hey, you haven't been paying for like the last 3 months. And instead of me, going to the eviction court, me spending hundreds of dollars, could you just please leave my unit? Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, please, on the way out, please don't try to don't take the stove. Don't take the fridge. Don't try to damage too many things. Just cause eviction is one important protection, as is rent stabilization, standardizing documents to include clear, comprehensive information on tenants' rights, and requiring that landlords provide notice in a tenant's native language. Why? We live in America. I mean, the standard language here is English. Shouldn't be on the tenant to translate the. Could you imagine going to Japan, renting a tenant and renting a unit, and say, "Hey, you gotta translate. You gotta translate your communication to English." It's like, what other part of the world does this? This is like, I don't know. Beyond tenants' protections, an adequate supply of affordable housing, something every state fails to provide. See, this is very important here. Beyond tenants' protections, an adequate supply of affordable housing. Well, yeah, there's enough money in the world for the government to build everybody a house, is there? Something every state fails to provide. Yes, even. Oh, God. Will go a long way in addressing the root of informal eviction. You mean like the most horrible housing projects in Chicago, like the Cabrini Greens? You know, the government, even though they're shitting on private landlords here, they never mention in this article the awesome history of the government providing housing and how those quote-unquote affordable housing had like leaking sewage, non-working elevators, just like straight up nothing but like 12 gangs living in that building. That thing is like a low security. I mean, the government providing housing was hell. But yet, private landlords provide such much nicer housing. And you're shitting on the goose that's laying the golden egg. Something that every state fails to provide will go a long way in addressing the root of informal eviction. Yes, unlimited money, unlimited resources, giving everybody something for free. That will go a long way to fixing that problem. It's like, what kind of childish shit is this? Yes, if everybody had unlimited money, that will go a long way into solving your financial problems. Well, no shit. But that's not the reality, is it? The current power imbalances exist in large part because tenants and landlords alike understand that housing precarity means that better options may not exist. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid the bare disparities that result when not everyone has a safe, stable, affordable place to live. No one policy or program will address the multitude of factors that lead to housing displacement in the U.S. But if it can't grapple with the scale and nature of informal eviction, we risk never tinkering at the fringes of this problem instead of tackling it fully. Another awful article by a leftist rag. I mean, we risk forever tinkering at the fringes problem. The result when not everyone has a safe, stable, affordable place to live. But what they don't understand is that the mere fact that somebody can be evicted, it's very crucial for people to pay their rent. Because once you take eviction off the table, well, some people have some decency, but a lot of people don't. And until we can go where the government is funded by donations only, we can, after that, we can talk about, a system where landlords, they have to be paid by quote unquote donations only as well.